Welcome to This Week in I'm your host, Peter McCartney, the Climate Campaigner at the Wilderness Committee. Tonight we're talking about carbon pricing, and more specifically, all the tricksy ways the biggest polluters find to avoid it. While you and I pay a little bit more for daily life, the worst offenders are getting off scot-free. Depending on whether you live in coastal or central Canada, relax Alberta, it's just geographically accurate. Carbon taxes are either a modest 8-cent surcharge on gasoline or the literal downfall of civilization as we know it. With so much rhetoric thrown around, it's hard to have an honest conversation about the policy itself, which is unfortunate because there are real concerns about the details. Putting a price on carbon is, in theory, an effective way to reduce emissions. It's solid logic. Make it more costly to pollute, and people, institutions, and businesses will choose clean technology instead. As long as you cushion the impact on low-income and rural communities, the transition should go as smooth as an oil lobbyist's scotch. But as usual, politics gets in the way. All over the world, governments are hesitant to increase costs on what they call emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries, or ARGHh. Lobbyists use this deeply boring jargon as a smokescreen, so just pretend it's an anime villain, hell-bent on warming the planet beyond recognition. ARGHh. While you and I ride our bikes to work and turn the thermostat down, ARGHh is devouring more and more of Canada's carbon budget, and lobbying hard for even more exemptions. Their trusty sidekick, your government, shelters fossil fuel companies with a few nifty tricks. In British Columbia, it's called the Industrial Incentive. Proposed liquefied natural gas plants will be the most polluting projects in the province. But plant owners will not have to pay increases in the carbon tax as long as they're cleaner than their global competitors. It's a bit like building the world's cleanest tire fire. That's great and all, but you're still building a brand new fossil fuel industry in the time of climate crisis. Alberta is even worse. They're actually using carbon tax revenues to pay tar sands producers to pump more oil. You heard me right. Alberta's carbon tax funds what they call output-based subsidies. While the money regular Albertans pay funds transit and renewables, Suncor, Cenovus, and CNRL get a big fat refund. That way, they can still double their production of dirty tar sands oil over the next 10 years as long as they shrink emissions per barrel. It's a bit like cutting down on your drinking by switching to American beer. Never afraid to copy a lousy idea. Prime Minister Trudeau saw this bit of nonsense and thought, gee, we need this across the whole darn country. In fact, 80% of the worst polluters' emissions will be exempt from his carbon tax. That might be why industry doesn't seem too fussed about it. Provinces using cap and trade, RIP Ontario, also managed to shelter their biggest polluters. Cap and trade works by issuing a shrinking number of carbon credits each year and letting companies buy and sell these licenses to pollute. It's all a bit of an invisible hand job, but it works. Only problem is, Quebec and Nova Scotia offer these licenses to their biggest polluters for free. This is literally based on something called an industry assistance factor. In other words, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do we love subsidizing our smokestacks? All of these complex schemes are put in place to protect the competitiveness of domestic industries, and the logic may seem reasonable. Nobody wants to hurt business if it will just pick up and move elsewhere. But oil and gas producers are nothing like a hockey team. You can't just move them to Houston if the government doesn't give you exactly what you want. Also, preventing new fossil fuel expansion is exactly what good climate laws should do. That's the whole point. We need to stop pumping carbon into the atmosphere. Scientists tell us we need to cut emissions to zero by 2050 for there to even be a future where an economy might be relevant. Good news is, more and more places are bringing in carbon pricing to help do just that. But if every country shields its domestic fossil fuel industry, then on a global scale, we are not actually tackling the main cause of the problem. Now, if you're watching this and looking for an excuse to oppose carbon pricing, I'm looking at you, Andrew Scheer. For God's sakes, stop! We've got 11 years to get our act together, and that leaves exactly no time for backpedaling. Canada's carbon price has more holes than a hockey net, but it's better than nothing. What we need is to close these loopholes and make the biggest polluters pay in full. Governments need the courage to see ARGHh for what it actually is and banish this demon spawn to the history books. We need a plan to phase out oil and gas over the next few decades and invest in workers so nobody is left behind. The fact of the matter is this industry cannot exist in 30 years, so what are we going to do about it?